Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Alex Levine, and I am the lead programmer and producer for the Place Theatre in Bedford, and I look after our programming and our partnership work here at the venue. Thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon's talk about getting started with regional touring. I'm really happy that we're being joined also by Emma Boswood from currently at Cambridge Junction, and I'll let Emma do a brief introduction of herself as well. Some housekeeping. I always forget to start with housekeeping. It wasn't me throwing over being like, do it now. Perfect start. Some brief housekeeping. We have some presentations, so you'll see the screen sharing is on. We also have BSL interpretation as well, and if you would like, as we're speaking, you can use the Zoom function on your menu to do this side-by-side view, which allows you to see the speaker and the presentation at the same time, if you find that useful. As you can see from our very loose schedule, Emma is going to start with her discussion, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some context here at Bedford and sort of more widely. And we've left plenty of time at the end for Q&A because we assumed that people in the room might have more specific questions that would be more useful to have direct answers to, rather than it just being a presentation or a generic presentation. So hopefully that's useful. We have two BSL interpreters in the room with us as well. They'll be switching over every 15 minutes. And hopefully my colleague Samal will be spotlighting them as the changeover occurs. If you have any problems or issues with your Zoom connection, drop a message to us, and hopefully Samal will be able to sort that out whilst I am talking. Is there anything else I need to talk about? Yes, Q&A. There are two ways that we can do this. If you feel comfortable doing so, then by all means use the raise hand function on the Zoom chat. And if you want to, you can then turn on your video and ask the question directly. If you don't feel comfortable or confident doing that, then absolutely no problem at all. Please feel free to write your question into the chat, and I will keep the chat window open so that we can pull those questions out and hopefully answer those as we go along towards the end. And I think, final thing, hopefully you will all have seen, we are recording this session. So that is, so we can make it available to other people after the fact. So if you are not happy being seen on the recording, then by all means keep your cameras off. But I think that is all of my housekeeping. In which case, I would like to start by welcoming Emma and ask her to introduce herself and the work that they do in Cambridge, and start the discussion.
Thanks. Thank you so much to Alex and to the Place for inviting me to be part of this. I've realised, I hope this room isn't too echoey. I'm in our boardroom at CJ, and I've also realised that behind me there's like some random notes, so maybe people will get some use out of this. So yeah, my name's Emma, my pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with ginger hair with quite a lot of roots, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and I've got a face mask on because I'm in the venue, which I really feel pleased about working back here again, which is really nice. So my current role is arts producer at Cambridge Junction. If you don't know Cambridge Junction, it's a multidisciplinary art space. So there's a variety of different things that take place here. There's a popular culture programmer who programs comedy, spoken word, music, anything that kind of sits under the popular culture banner. And under the much more interesting culture banner is the arts programme. So I programme all of the theatre, dance, circus, live art, and also all of the family work. At Cambridge Junction, we have 3 performance spaces. We've got a studio space, which is J3, that's like a 200 capacity studio where we also host residencies. We've got a 220 capacity theatre space, which is behind me over there. And that's where I program most of my theatre programme. And then we also have a club space, so it's a 900 capacity gig and club venue, which mostly is programmed by the popular culture producer. In terms of the arts programme, we prioritise work. We have 2 kind of key curatorial priorities, and those are works that disrupt and linger. We use disrupt in the sense of presenting new ideas or ways of thinking. So I really love shows that will provoke me or surprise me or shock me or pull the rug out from underneath me. They don't have to literally do that. They could be doing that more subtly, or they could just like absolutely shock me, like some of the shows I've seen. I just love that. And we also, I say linger because we prioritize work that will stay with us. So it could be days afterwards that you're thinking about the performance, an idea that it raised, or kind of a different experience that it shared. And you might find yourself thinking about how you saw and getting your response to it days later. Like personally, I definitely find that I can't respond to work often immediately. It takes me a couple of days to see, like, what did I actually think of that? Which is why I hate when you finish a show and someone goes, what did you think? It's like, talk to me in 3 days, then I'll know. Okay, and so our programme at Cambridge Junction has undergone a bit of a shift recently, and that is meaning that we're prioritising work that we have supported or commissioned, and that's just because we have limited presentation opportunities, and we've supported and commissioned a lot of brilliant work which we haven't had space for. So that's what the shift is at the moment. I don't imagine that will be the shift forever, but for the next series at least, that's what we're prioritising. And then in an attempt to like tackle some of the underrepresentation in our industry, at Cambridge Junction, we prioritise work by disabled artists, LGBTQ+ artists and artists of colour. Our programme has a contemporary focus, including live art, dance and circus. We rarely present plays unless they're really, really great and they shock. They've got like a shock moment. But the venue does cater to different styles of performance. So we have Hotbed Theatre Festival, who present a series of new writing. So it's good that we have that opportunity as well. So before Cambridge Junction, I worked as a programme producer at the Marlborough Theatre in Brighton's queer theatre. I don't know if you know it. Well, I know some of you do, because Jess, I can see you're here, who I met there. So that was very different. The Marlborough Theatre is a 60-seater venue above a pub. It was very DIY, we had no money, and it was quite a different experience from working in a funded MPO that I work in now. Like on my first day at Cambridge Junction, they gave me a branded water bottle. I was like, what? This is going to be wild. And then before I worked at the Marlborough, I worked as a freelance producer. So I was on the side of, I was on the other side of it, basically contacting venues. And if I knew then what I knew now about kind of how to get through and how to get noticed, I think it would have been really useful. So I'm going to share a few tips about what kind of catches my eye as a programmer, and then a bit about how to kind of work with us in a rural touring capacity as a venue. Okay, so I know Alex is going to go into more detail on different ways to like approach venues and what to include, so I won't kind of go into detail on that. But I would say that the approach is obviously really important when you're contacting a venue, and what's really good is to do something that catches their attention. Like, as I'm sure you're aware, programmers receive many emails, and yeah, they should. I definitely try to respond to every single one because people put a lot of attention into writing them. But as a programmer, when you can see that they've definitely kind of paid attention to the venue, you're much more inclined to give time to properly consider what it is they're kind of approaching with. So one tip is try your best to stand out. Don't be afraid to be different or informal. I'm going to give you an example of an email we received. This is in 2019. So I've taken out anything that would let you know who it is, but they say, "Dear Emma, my name is blank. and I'm a chubby homosexual Welsh writer. I've had my work featured at the X venue and Y venue, most recently receiving a seed commission from X. I'm writing probably the rudest and most disgustingly unprofessional approach in hopes you may have time in your busy schedule to take a look at a very short example of my work. No pressure, but I shan't eat until I hear from you for fear of having a mouthful of food when you ring with the good news. Thanks again for your time. I can only imagine how busy you must be with much bigger fish to fry than myself. And then no. So obviously not everyone is going to feel comfortable with that approach, and that's kind of one extreme, but I think it is really good to throw something in like that if you can. Like, I know that myself and Matt Berman, who's the artistic director of Cambridge Junction, both really enjoyed receiving this email, got such a sense of the work from this approach. And I can't imagine, and I'm sure like Alex, you can say what you think about this, but I can't imagine someone getting that and thinking, that's terrible, who are they, who do they think we are? Like, if it's the right if the venue you're approaching would kind of appreciate that sort of humour, then I think it's worth going for it. Yeah, and then so yeah, and trying to be kind of as personable as you can. So I know Alex is going to cover this, but doing any research into the venue, but also personal connections. So recently I received an email from someone who spoke about coming to Cambridge Junction. They said, oh, I came to see this show by Chris Brett Bailey. I thought it was amazing, or I thought it was weird, or it wasn't, like, but their actual response to it. And they also said, oh, my mum didn't really enjoy it, which really kind of chimed with my mum thinks of my program. She never comes to any of it. So it's like immediately there was this like connection with the person who was approaching me. And yeah, like I said, do make an effort to give everyone who emails us adequate attention to what they've said. But if they put in something like that, it does make you think, oh, I have a human connection with this person. Like, I'd like to hear more. And then another thing I would say about in the approach is do try and kind of keep it as brief as possible. So I know it's hard because you're very passionate about your work, but what I would say is to include an attachment, which is like a tour pack, which has all that information, which I know that Alex is going to go through, and it's really invaluable. When I first started out as a producer approaching venues, we would write emails this long, and it would be like paragraphs about why we're making the work, what it means to us. That was because we just recently kind of came out of university, and we were used to writing like essays about the work, and that was like very well honed. I think those skills are so important, but they are placed in a different thing in a pack. Because if a producer's getting, say, like 50 emails a day asking them to consider a show, if they open an email and it's like this long, they could think, oh, I don't have time to read that right now, and then it becomes less immediate. If it's a quick couple of lines, hi, I'm interested in the venue, maybe a joke, if it feels right, check out the pack, then I think they're more likely to kind of give it time and have a response time as well. And then I would say, so when you're contacting a venue, obviously it depends on what it is you have to that you're contacting them about. It might be an invitation to your performance, and it might be just saying, oh, I'm really interested in working with you, and this is my work, and having a pack. But whatever you're approaching about, one thing I think is really good to do is ask for an informal chat. So if you live in the vicinity of the venue, saying, oh, could I come in and have a coffee? It'd be great to talk to you more about how you program. That's a really good approach. If you don't live near the venue, thank you, pandemic, because we're all used to Zooming now. So you can say, is it possible to have a quick virtual coffee and just have a talk about how you program? And I think making it clear in that approach that you're saying, can I have a talk about, I want to find out more about the venue and how you do things, and not I want to pitch my idea to you, because like I think it is a responsibility of programmers to make the time to have that conversation. I think it's a really important thing to do, and you can put a face to a name. I said here, as a venue programmer, they should be doing this, and during that conversation, just make sure it is also about getting to know them, like talking about like what they're interested in, and you can really get a feel for whether your work would be right there. I know you might be like, oh, I feel like it would work really well, but you want to know the venue programmer, like actually has an understanding of the sort of work that you are interested in and are making, and it feels like that will be a really well held relationship. And yeah, and then also in this conversation, you can find out what, if any, other avenues of support they offer. So they might not be able to offer you programming opportunity at this point, but you could say, do you have any development support available? Sometimes venues aren't able to be like as open with this, like they might not include this information on their website. We're definitely trying to change our transparency at Cambridge Junction. It's an ongoing thing for venues. I think a lot of the time you'll find that people, producers and programmers will be able to talk to you about the support they offer, but it's not necessarily on a page because they're trying to work out how to put it on a page. So having that conversation will let you kind of see, oh, they might offer residencies or scratch opportunities or different things like that. And then, so I realise I'm going back and forth a bit, but I'm just going to skip forward in my notes to saying about development opportunities. So different venues have different opportunities, but mostly they'll have some ways that you can engage with like development. And one, for example, like these workshops that the Place are putting on. So when I worked at the Marlborough, we wouldn't have like a network, but we would have occasional workshops that that artists coming to us would put on. It's a really good opportunity to say, when you're approaching venues, I took part in this workshop. I really got a lot from it. If you did, if you didn't, maybe it's not the right relationship. But if you're like, yeah, I really felt like that suited my practice, it helps to give a clearer idea of what you're interested in, and also the venue can think about like how they would work to develop what it is you're proposing. But for example, at Cambridge Junction, we do have a network called Troop. And it's a really good opportunity for artists based in the east of England, because there's different workshops that we put on, but also it gives you access to our support as a venue. So working with our artist development producer to have one-on-one meetings and talking about where you want to go with your practice and how we can support you to get there. What it doesn't do is go straight to programming, joining Troop, being programmed at Cambridge Junction, because not everyone who joins Troop is making contemporary performance. Some people who join Troop are more interested in writing. That's not what we platform necessarily, but we can help with connections and all these different things. So I think, yeah, any sort of membership opportunity, networking opportunities or development opportunities can be a really good way to kind of work out whether it feels like the right place to present your work. I hope I'm doing okay for time. Okay, cool. And I meant to time myself anyway. So, and then also in the initial email that you send, I know I mentioned about a pack, but just this is a really good opportunity to sell your work. So make it a PDF, put some really good images on it, and include all the information that Alex will explain shortly. And then footage is very important if you do have it. If you don't have it, like if you're at an earlier stage, that's absolutely fine as well. You can say, you should aim to record any sort of presentation you do so that you have got footage. It doesn't have to be amazing professional quality. It just really gives a sense of the work. So at best in a pack, there would be an edited trailer, which gives gives an example of how it would be marketed. Like your marketing team at a venue might share that on our social media. But I also think it's useful to have edited footage of the show. So this could be like between 1 and 2 minutes, just extracts of the show itself. Not that it wouldn't be used publicly for marketing, but for a producer or programmer to watch internally. Because if you send through an edited trailer and the full footage, it's likely that they'll watch the edited trailer, but it's unlikely that they'll watch the full footage. What they're likely to do is to watch 5 to 10 minutes of it and to click through. So watch the start, go in a bit, watch a bit more, see what's happening in the production, have a look at what happens at the end. That feels horrible, right? As an artist, it's like, no, I've made this piece for a reason. It's this long, every bit is really important. Of course it is. It's horrible that we have to do that. But if you're getting so many people approaching you, the truth is we just do have to do that. And so it's much better, and you have much more control if, as an artist, you are saying, this is the shortened, here are the clips I want you to see, basically, this. And then you've done it for them, and they're not going to click to the bit that maybe you're a bit unsure of, because like, I'm sure that would happen if I did that with my show. Okay, great. But also, I would include that and the full footage, or you might include something that says, if you'd like full footage, we send it, ask me and I can send it across. Okay, and then the final bit about approaching venues is, so use any sort of connections you have. I know that might feel obvious, but if you've been programmed elsewhere and you have a good relationship with that venue, it's always worth saying to them, do you think you could connect me up with X venue? Like, do you have good contacts there? Do you think my work would do well there? Because as a programmer, if I've programmed a work and I think it's really good quality, I'm really up for supporting it and doing an introduction to another venue if I think it would work for their program. And yeah, again, this is a bit of an annoying truth, but programmers are kind of more likely to, they have to respond to someone if they've got a relationship with them. Same if they know you as an artist. Like if it's like a nameless, like if it's just an email that says, hi there, this is my show, then they don't have an impetus to respond. But if it's personal or there's a personal connection, then you're much more likely to get a response, I think. Alex, how long have I been going for? Do you know?
You've been going for about 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
So you're welcome to keep talking, though. We've got time.
I might just do another 5 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Sorry, I know I said 20 minutes to you. I should have timed myself. Okay, so those are my kind of tips on approaching. In the Q&A, feel free to ask questions and I can go into more detail on any of them. But what I've just also prepared a bit more about is about when you're programmed. So when you're programmed by a venue, first thing you should do is ask for contacts for different team members. So who is the tech contact? Who's the marketing contact? This will be different at each venue. At the Marlborough, the answer would have been me, it's all me. Like I'm the person who does everything. But at Cambridge Junction, there is a marketing team. So I would put the company in touch with Ed and Laura, our marketing team. And what's really good if they have capacity to do this is to ask if you could have a meeting. It doesn't have to be a long meeting with the marketing team and say, how does my copy work for your audiences? Like, you've got my marketing information. Do you think this translates? Please be honest. And because our marketing team have worked here for a long time, if they're given that permission, they can say, oh, actually, I think maybe this is a bit artsy speak for our audience. If you just change this bit, you might get more of an audience here. And yeah, my tip is to, like, I know it's painful, but try not to be precious about the copy. If the marketing team tell you, I think this is going to sell better, because obviously you'd rather have a bigger audience than have a really kind of artistic copy, which would work really well for programmers, but not necessarily for audiences. And then also, when you're talking to the marketing team, ask what content is useful for you to provide and when. So for example, Cambridge Junction really love it if an artist we work with can give us a really short video we can put on Instagram. Hey, I'm looking forward to coming to Cambridge Junction next week, like more of a personal touch. But we don't necessarily tell every artist who comes to us that we want that, because we're over capacity. So if they say, what's useful for me to give you, then they can say, well, we like this. And if you have capacity, you can give it to us. And then in terms of team, when you're approaching a venue, think about, like, it's worth asking them, who do they need you to bring with you, and like team members wise. For example, when I was working at the Marlborough, we had no money and we needed companies to bring a touring technician with them as part of their company, and that was communicated to them beforehand. But it's important to know that when you're putting together your costs for performing at a venue, because you need to calculate the cost of the entire, the like bare minimum cost for you to do it, and then that works into like what the guarantee would be at that venue. Different, like, as I've only got 5 minutes, I shouldn't go on for too long. Different venues have different ways of working. So at the Marlborough, we would do a split. We would do a 70-30 split. on most of the shows that came to us, and because we didn't have any money, we often didn't offer a guarantee. So people had to think like, is it financially viable for me to do this? And we would recommend that they should do it if they have coverage from an arts council, or they have contingency. Whereas at Cambridge Junction, we pay fees, so they don't have as much of a to take as much of a risk. It just depends on what the venue like is doable, and if you can find that information out, that's really important. And then my final thing that I'll say is that afterwards, after you've performed at a venue, it's really good to ask for a debrief with the person that booked you. So just saying, is it possible to have another, just like a coffee, a virtual coffee, or if you live nearby, yeah, because you can say to the venue, is it useful for you to get feedback? I love it when people feedback about working with us, because I think people are often too scared to, I mean, I don't blame them, I understand it, but scared to kind of offer anything that could be constructive because they think maybe I won't get programmed there again. I would much rather know things that we're not doing well, or things that are difficult or challenging for artists, so that we can improve. So saying to them, is it useful to you to get feedback? If they're like no, then maybe don't give it, but I personally love it. And then in this kind of post-show debrief, you can also talk about future programming opportunities. So what's the venue's impetus with like building audiences for companies? So at the Marlborough, for example, we would program the same artist repeatedly in a short periods of time, and invest in kind of like building an audience for the work. At Cambridge Junction, like sadly, we're not able to do that because we've got such fewer presentation opportunities. So often we have to have like an 18-month gap between shows that we program, which is much more difficult in terms of building audience, but is just the reality with like having so fewer slots. So if they do say, oh yes, we're really interested in kind of like building an audience for your work, then saying, great, is there any opportunity for us to get something in the diary now for next year? And just kind of like taking those chances when you can. Okay, and my final thing is, don't be afraid to follow up and keep following up when you sent an email. Don't think, oh, I've emailed them, I've done all the things that like I'm supposed to have done and I haven't heard back. Just email again and again. Like it's because when you email again, you'll go straight to the top and they'll think, okay, right, let me properly look at all of this. It's never embarrassing or bad to do it, it's just useful. And sometimes I think I've missed out on some amazing artists who've contacted me because I haven't got back to them in a certain space of time. It's got lost. It's just so worth to just keep going. Okay, great, I'm gonna stop there then.
Thank you so much, Emma. Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, and so much that chimes with me as well. That sense of is it anxiety, or is it like guilt of like not, oh, I haven't responded to that person for 4 months.
Yeah.
Is it too late to reply now?
Totally. And it's with me, I most likely have the email still open. So if they say, oh, just responding, I'm like, great, I can pull it up. Now I'll get back. So it's useful.
That's wonderful. I am going to take over and talk a little bit now as well. What I need to do is just start sharing my screen. Get the right one up. There we are. Hopefully you can all see me and the screen alongside it. Also, Emma, thank you for reminding me, because I failed to do this. I often do for access purposes. My name's Alex. I am a white man of middle age with a scraggly beard and slowly balding. I'm wearing a blue jumper. And behind me is a set of shelves, a nice bright pink with some plants on them. And I'm wearing bright luminous green headphones that make me look like a 14-year-old. So what I'm going to do over the next half an hour or so is to talk both specifically about the place, but also to try, where possible, to extrapolate out and talk more generally about working with small-scale venues. So some things might be very specific to the way that we operate at the place, and other things might feel like they're a bit generalized. And so apologies if you feel like either of those things are the case, but I didn't want to just focus on the Place Theatre, but I also didn't want to talk on behalf of the entire industry, because I can't. For those of you who don't know us, Place Bedford is a 125-seater venue. We are based in Bedford, in Bedfordshire, between Cambridge and Milton Keynes. And we are a community and professional multi-arts space. We run a program of music, including folk music and jazz music. We run a program or a series of programs of film screenings funded by the BFI, the British Film Institute. And we bring in a wide variety of touring, professional theatre, live art, and yeah, quite a wide blend, including quite a lot of work for families and young people. And alongside all of that, we also support the local community, amateur dramatics scene, schools, colleges, institutions, dance groups, and everything that makes up the local non-professional performing arts infrastructure. So what I will start with is to talk about the little guys. So we're only 125 seats on 3 sides. So actually, if you're bringing in a proscenium arch type show or an end-on show, we're only about 90 because the rest of the seats curve around the sides and can't be used. Most of us are not well staffed. We may only have a handful of paid employees. We may be heavily involved with volunteers, whether they be delivering specific services or whether they are our front of house and like our customer facing element. Certainly at the Place Bedford, we are very heavily staffed by volunteers, and most of our customers and most of our audience members who come to the venue, 90% of their engagement with someone from the Place Bedford will be with someone who is a volunteer. Our staff may be undertrained because budgets aren't big, which means that you might have somebody who is early career that you're working with, or possibly in the case of venues that are perhaps run by local authorities, you might have somebody who doesn't have a specific background in performing arts, who might have a background in customer service or in events delivery, but doesn't understand the context of performing arts, whether that be circus or theatre or dance or whatever particular element. And so when you are talking about the work that you make and that you're touring, it's very useful to assume that the person at the other end of the email or the telephone or however you're communicating with them might not actually know as much about the work that you make as you do. And we've certainly seen that over the years here. In the context of where we stand right now, with COVID being where it is, most venues are in the process of rebuilding audiences, alongside trying to find new ones to build new connections and to reach people who perhaps didn't engage with the venue much before the pandemic, and we are hoping now may engage more. And those last two that I read on there, I promised the BSL team that I wouldn't read off the slides, but I'm going to read off those two. We are balancing what is happening locally, i.e. the demands from our perhaps people who are hiring our spaces, who live and work around us, who want to bring their dance schools end of term show or produce their week-long amateur theatre company piece at our venue, alongside the needs and wants of those who are coming from outside of our area and wanting to present their work to Bedford audiences or to local audiences. And so what that does mean is that when it comes to what I call the scheduling Jenga, we are not infinitely flexible. And there are periods of time as venues where we are desperate for touring work because no one locally wants to make or present shows. And you would not be shocked to learn that those tend to overlap almost exclusively with the times that professionals want to bring professional touring work to us as well. So there are some hot spots in our years where, for example, the month of November, I could have 3 venues and November could be 2 months long, and I would still not be able to accommodate all of the people who want to produce and present work in November. Can I get anyone to produce or present work in February? Absolutely not. So my top tip is, and feel free to ignore it as much as you want. There are times of the year where we're really keen on bringing work in. If you are more flexible in when you're taking work out on tour, you may find that there is a significant uptake from smaller scale venues, especially venues that are working a lot with their local communities and perhaps maybe a hired space as well as a presenting space. When it comes to, and I'm going to go on a bit, as Emma said, to talk a little bit about the kind of the pitch, like that first time you try and make contact. But this is sort of pre that, I would suggest, and I would say, as the slide title says, context is king. What do you know already about this venue? In particular, are they programming work that looks like the work that you're making? Now, that doesn't mean that they have to. That actually, you might go on a website of a theatre and find that they've never programmed anything like your work before. Does that mean that you shouldn't approach them? Absolutely not. But what it does mean is that you might need to do a little bit of extra work yourself to to advocate on behalf of the work you're making, and to say, we're bringing I've got this piece, I'm an LGBTQ performance artist, and I've got this piece of work and I really want to bring it to your venue. I noticed that you haven't recently programmed any work by LGBTQ artists. Done a little bit of research, and there's this local organization in your area that support the LGBTQ community. And from what I can see from looking around in the statistics or online, there does seem to be a local community, and I'm really interested in helping you reach that community and bringing them to your venue for the first time. If I got an email like that, I would be over the moon. In fact, and fortunately, I do get emails like that, because artists do put the time and effort into exploring and understanding the context in which we are operating. I'm also very keen, as Emma says, to have that conversation right up front, to say, this is what we know about our local area, this is what we know about our audiences that currently attend, and this is where we want to go. And it might be that doesn't ultimately gel, but we're still happy to invest that time, because the hope is, as Emma says as well, that conversation feeds off. Someone goes, that venue wasn't quite right for us, but I'm going to tell my friends about, or to tell the other people that I've worked with that they exist and that these are the things that they're looking for. And the information gets spread naturally through the sort of ecosystem. A lot of what it says on that slide, Emma has touched on already. I will make this slide available afterwards. I'll ask the people at Living Record Festival to send this out so that everyone who's signed up can get a copy of this. Those last three things do actually have links. The basic demographics takes you to the Office of National Statistics page, where you can look at just the basic demographics of each individual borough or unitary authority, local authority in England. I think across the whole of the UK, but I'm going to stick with England in case I'm wrong. And the link that says types of audience takes you to the page for Audience Finder, which is the, for those of you who aren't aware of it, it is the preferred provider of audience segmentation of the Arts Council. And in fact, I think all NPO organisations, that's the National Portfolio organisations, they have to use Audience Finder to segment their audience and to report to the Arts Council on a regular basis about the work that they're doing and how they're reaching new people. And as a result, that means that most people who are going for Arts Council applications are encouraged to use it as well. You can find out about the specific segments by just going onto the website, and they'll tell you about I think it's 10 different segments that they use. But I believe that an account is completely free to set up. And there are some really useful tools in there that explain more about the kinds of audiences that exist or that they segment, and also a brilliant tool for looking at audience development and creating an audience development plan. It is quite a lot of work to invest in, but the return for spending that time really thinking about who you want to reach, how you want to reach them, and the ways in which you're going to do it can pay huge dividends, especially if you're thinking about ongoing Arts Council applications, or even funding from any particular source. So you have your show, and you are going to reach out to someone has given you a nice big Excel or whatever your preferred provider of word processing document full of emails for programmers and venue managers and artistic directors, and you're going to send them an email. You're going to cold call them with your show opportunity. Emma's example is absolutely beautiful, and I would definitely reply to that email as well. As you say, it might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it certainly would get me interested. And yeah, ultimately we're humans as well. You're a human, we're a human. What we're engaging in is a human interaction, and we want to feel like everybody's being listened to and being given the time that they deserve. I wish I'd put it on here, and now I may add it in, so you might get a slide that contains this. The famous quote from the Princess Bride: "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepared to die. Polite introduction. Statement of intent. Brief introduction." It's often held up as being the perfect example of how to very quickly establish a situation. So when I say introduce yourself, it is, be as succinct as you possibly can. Talk a little bit about the work that you make and who it might be aimed at. A really big one for us, and for me in particular, is this idea of ambition. I don't need to know immediately what your 15-year plan is, but I'd like to have a sense when I'm talking to somebody about whether this is someone who is looking to start an ongoing relationship, or whether it's somebody who has a product that they would like to sell and like to put in front of our audiences. Both of those things are completely valid. And for a small team that only has a finite resource and time, actually having some companies that are approaching this and saying, this is my product that I'm selling. And when I've finished selling this product, you might not hear from me again. And having some where it's a more ongoing, deep relationship are useful. I cannot do all of both, or I can't do all of only one. We don't have the capacity to have that relationship with every company. And we wouldn't want to have a purely transactional relationship with every company, but we do like a nice blend of the two. As I mentioned before, context is king. Do some research. Some of the best emails I've had from companies that haven't necessarily resulted in us bringing the show to the venue for whatever reason, but the ones that have definitely guaranteed an engagement and a response have been, I've been on your website and I see that you have a youth theatre. Our show is aimed at young people aged 13 to 17, and we think there'll be a great fit with the work that you and your youth theatre are doing. Immediately I'm going, oh, they've been on my website. I've had emails that have called us the Space Bedford, which will still get a reply, but it might take a few weeks, because that's a fairly basic one, that one. The last two I think are really valuable, or sorry, the last three are really valuable. As Emma said, knowing how much it's going to cost you to put your show out is absolutely vital. And we do not want to underpay artists. But we can only afford so much. If you know how much your show costs to deliver, and you state that up front, then we can save everybody's time. Because if you know that it's going to cost you £3,000 a night to bring your show out, that sounds like an amazing show, but we simply cannot afford it. And so let's not waste each other's time having a back and forth about how great the show is, and then reach a week later a brick wall where we can't proceed any further. Actually, I'm more likely to go, sounds brilliant, we definitely can't afford that. However, why don't you try reaching out to X venue or Y person, because they've got a bigger budget or they've done work like this before. Because I've saved time, basically, because I knew up front what it was that people were asking for financially, and therefore what it was that whether I could work within the bounds of that. Should that be a hard and fast figure? No, it would be helpful if there was a little bit of flexibility. And it might be that you say, my show's going to cost £800. And I say, can we do 700? But, you know, it's about sort of, I guess, boundaries of price bands rather than hard and fast. This is the exact price tag. That all fits into the be upfront part. Like if you put that in email 1 or perhaps email 2, then we're all starting from the same place. And finally, and this is especially the case for people who where an Arts Council application is perhaps required to make the show work. Understand your timeline and again, be upfront about that. If you know that you have to apply, you haven't started writing the funding application yet, you're in the very early stages of scoping out what might be out there, then perhaps consider approaching the conversation with an introduction that says, we're looking at touring this show either in autumn 2022 or into 2023 because we need to do an Arts Council application. We work with artists who have had successful applications. We work with artists that have not had successful applications. And we work with artists that don't even apply, that find other ways to fund the work that they tour. So it will not come as a surprise to most venues when you say, unfortunately, we weren't successful this time around, we're going to reapply. Can we change the dates that we're talking about? It's much easier if that's known up front. And it's not a case of, we really want to bring this, we really want to bring this show to you in April. Oh, wow, great, April, 3 months time, cool. Yeah, I've got a space. Yeah, we can make that work. Oh, actually, we didn't get our funding. So can we actually talk about October? Oh, hang on. Do you mean October or do you mean down the line? It's about getting off on the right foot, I suppose. So audiences in particular, and you will notice here that I think both Emma and I have focused predominantly on kind of the initial start, like those first conversations. We haven't talked about, and I haven't included any slides to specifically talk about the kind of logistics and operation of, okay, so it's all going ahead. We're going to turn up at the venue on the day, and what should we expect from that? But if you have any questions about that kind of thing, again, don't feel like you can't ask those in the Q&A at the end. I just chose to focus on the preamble rather than the finished moment. This is a huge question, and for a small scale venue that spends quite a lot of time working with emerging artists or artists that are I would say establishing themselves, where they have perhaps made a show or two. They have committed themselves to being professional artists, but they haven't got a huge back catalogue under their belts. Asking the number of times I have asked companies and artists, who is your audience? And they have said, well, our target audiences are families and old people. I've gone, those aren't targets. I have a personal aversion to anyone who uses the word target as a plural. I don't feel like you can target multiple things. Now, I may be wrong. I'm quite happy to be proven wrong. But when it comes to trying to get specific communities through the doors to see shows, I have found that a focus on one particular target more often than not pays much better dividends. And it doesn't preclude you, doesn't stop you from having a more broad approach to program or to reaching out to audiences. But I, as the programmer or the producer, and then through into my marketing and comms team, will find it much easier if, when we sit down, and I sit down with Lissy, who's my head of comms, and we talk about the forthcoming season, and I say, there's this show coming up and their target audience is X, then immediately they're going to go, great, okay, we've got this group, we've got this contact, we've got this email address, we can start the ball rolling on that straight away. If you've already done this show, and this, you may be approaching venues and you haven't produced the show ever before, and this is your first time, in which case some of what I'll say next isn't super relevant. But if you have already produced the show in any capacity and you've put it in front of people, talk about that. Say, we produced this show and we brought in a local primary school, and here's a testimonial from the head teacher of that primary school about not just how the kids reacted to the show, but about how you initiated that relationship. I started out by running a small scale company that toured for a few years as well. And so we understand that quite often those initial audiences might come through personal contacts, that it might be that, my uncle's ex-wife is the head teacher of that school, and that's how I made that contact. That's absolutely fine. But if you can evidence how the relationship grew, that meant that school came to watch the piece, that fills us as a venue with a little bit of, okay, these people know how to talk to other people. They know how to work with others to engage and bring bums on seats. If you don't know who you're aiming to reach, as I mentioned, the audience finder can help with the 10 segments. And this is being recorded, so I have to be careful what I say. It is art speak. That is not under question. But it's art speak that we have to speak as venues and as people applying for funding. And so you won't necessarily, if you use it, although it might feel weird using it, it won't fall on deaf ears, is what I guess what I'm trying to drive at. That although you might be like, what is a metrocultural? It's liable that the person at the other end of the email might know, probably will know, and you will be talking a common language as opposed to someone going, I don't understand what that is. Let's talk a little bit about marketing in particular. As a small scale venue, we have one freelance sort of part-time member of staff who looks after our entire comms team. Our entire comms team as a whole maybe add up to one full-time member of staff between three different people. So if you already have a plan, that is going to make life for everyone easier. Knowing upfront and stating upfront if there is money in your budget to cover additional costs, whether that be social media marketing or print marketing or banners, is really helpful so that we can plan a timeline for those things and include that in the work that we are doing. It's also really valuable to state upfront in 2022 how much you are planning on using digital media to promote the work that you are doing and how much you are going to rely on physical media, flyers, posters, banners, pop-up stands, etc. Because we need to factor in a timeline of when that stuff is going to go out. I was talking with my colleague about this particular issue a couple of hours ago, and the key thing that we kept coming back to is this sense that as a touring company, you might be doing this with 10 venues. Let's say you've got a huge tour coming up and actually you're doing it with 30 venues. Your timeline might be day one, we email all of those 30 venues and we send them a marketing pack. Day 10, we send all of them their print. Day whatever, etc., etc. So you're doing that same thing, but you're doing the same thing at the same time with everybody. We might be working with 30 companies that season, and each of those companies might be on day one on a different day. So we've got all of those different things happening concurrently. So every day is the start of the marketing process for something, and the end of the marketing process for something else, and the middle for 15 other things. So knowing your timeline up front and getting ahead of the game might make everybody's life easier, including your own. And even though audiences at the moment are quite last minute in the way that they are approaching it, we're currently seeing around 40 to 50% of our tickets are being sold in the last 48 hours. That doesn't mean I want to spend the last 48 hours exclusively marketing one show, because the day after I've got another show, and that way lies madness, is what I would say. As a establishing company, as a young company, or as a company of people making work early in your career, we believe that our audience is your audience, that we don't own the people. They might like us, but they're not loyal to us. They will go where the content that they want to see is, and they should be free to do that. The more work you can do early on to take our audience and make them your audience, the more down the line that will benefit both of us. We have some companies that we work with where we basically these days, obviously we sell the tickets, we get the flyers, we get the posters, we put stuff out through our social media and email, but we don't do a huge amount of the work because over the period of time that they've been coming to us, they have built their own audience base, and that audience base has signed up to their email. And so when they announce that they're going out on tour, our tickets sell because the local audience are finding out directly from the people whose work they are interested in. And that is perfect for both of us, because ultimately the relationship that you are building is with the end user, with the final consumer. And so we don't feel like, well, I say this as the Place Bedford, I don't speak for everybody. It doesn't feel like you're poaching our audience. Actually, what you're doing is much more equitably sharing the workload of reaching people in our local communities. Emma mentioned this in the way that you approach in the email. If your show is dynamic and changing and completely different to anything else that's been seen out there, why wouldn't your marketing be? So don't feel like you have to do the specific things that are considered to be the right way to go about reaching audiences in theatres, because from my last decade of working in theatres, I would say a lot of us are still trying to work out the best way to reach audiences, and the old-fashioned ways work for some audiences, but they do not work for all audiences. So it might be that you say, actually, we're not going to do any print for this show. And you might get some pushback from some venues who go, well, nothing, not even a single poster. But if you can then evidence that and say, look, we know that our audience are young people, and we don't think that you're going to get your flyers and posters into places that young people are. So instead, we're going to put all of our money into digital, and this is our plan for doing that. This is how we're going to approach that. We're going to spend our time instead shooting some videos that we're going to put out on Instagram, and we'd like to do an Instagram takeover on your channel. Then as a venue manager, I'm going to go, sounds like you've thought about this. Amazing. Let's get on with making that happen. That sounds like it is representative of you, the work that you are making, and it's probably going to reach people. If I don't get that, then I am going to push you for flyers and posters, because it's not clear to me what your plan is. And the final part on the marketing is this idea of, if you might have time or capacity to come and meet the venue and talk about the venue and the work that you're making early in the discussion, it's also worth considering if there are opportunities that you can build into your tour plan or your program or your application that allow you to do that with audiences prior to your show. That could be a discussion, could be a workshop, it could be coming in and talking to a school about what it means to be a professional theatre maker. It doesn't have to be an exclusively marketing opportunity or operation. What it should be, though, is a chance for local people to see your face, to see your name, and to get a flag on your show prior to you arriving. Now, I appreciate that has additional resource requirements in terms of your time to do that kind of work, but it can be invaluable to have that early contact with potential audience members prior to your show, especially if you're an early career company. Then I want to talk, I've sort of so far assumed that the work that you are pitching already exists, that you are selling a product that you understand and have already created. But when it comes to talking to venues, you might also want to talk about future work. And quite often, I have found it most useful when a company approaches me with both of those things, where they say, this is what we're selling today, but we're looking to this in the future. And it comes back to that idea of ambition, of understanding where you're going in your journey as a company. So is this show that you have made part of your development journey? Is it something that's going to inform future work? And if so, can we work together? Because we understand that it's a lot of energy from both sides to build an audience for a brand new group of people. There's a reason why Hollywood keeps making the same movies, because starting from scratch and building an audience for a brand new movie takes money and time and energy, and that doesn't make profits. And it's no different on the smallest scale of performing arts theatre. There are audiences out there who are absolutely avid attendees of the brand new, but they are vanishingly small. And a lot of our audiences, particularly I think regionally, are much more willing or much less risk averse, that they are willing to take maybe a single gamble, and that gamble might be on a company that they've not heard of, as long as they've heard of the content. So that a lot of adaptations of books do very well in Bedford, because people might not have heard of the company, but everybody knows Jane Eyre. Meanwhile, companies that we've maybe worked with over the last 10 years who are going to do a show that is a brand new piece of writing that's got some kind of fantastical Terry Gilliam style, like the Fantabulosum of Dr. Parnassus, which I think is actually a Terry Gilliam film. Their audiences are going to attend that because it's being made by company X that we know, but I've never heard of that show. There are a few people in Bedford who will come and see a company they've never heard of making a show that they've never heard of. But I'm not sure, completely honestly, and maybe this is as a venue we struggle to get the impact with them. I'm not sure that there are enough of them in our catchment to pay you the money that you deserve for that show. And that's me being 100% honest about it. So it's something to consider. However, if we can have a longer term relationship, if we can build over time, if we can find a way of establishing you in the minds of our audience, and then down the line, having local people involved somehow in the creation and development of that work, then we're all investing at the same time into this idea. And I skipped over it from the past slide, but I think it's worth mentioning back again at the moment. There is a lot of impact at the moment in the Arts Council's new strategy on this idea of relevance, and in particular, local relevance, of wanting to see companies and organizations and venues and institutions that are representative of the community in which they work. So that is much easier to do if it's baked in at the start than if it's bolted on at the end. And I think over the last 5 years, I've seen a nice shift away from, we've made a show, now what's our engagement plan? And towards, how are we going to engage with people and how will that inform our show? And I probably should go into more detail about that in a Q&A if anyone wants to understand what I'm talking about. So I've got a few moments to get my brain in gear to make that point better. The second point on this final slide, and I'm coming towards the end, and my timing's not too bad, is this idea of it being a two-way street in terms of not just our relationship, and not just us being human with each other in the way that we talk to each other, but this idea that we have something to learn from you as much as you have something to learn from us. So if you are particularly skilled in something, or if the work that you are making is addressing a specific new genre or a new audience group, or you work particularly with accessibility in your work, please feel compelled, I would say, in the way that you negotiate with venues, to offer some of that back, to say to the venue, we'd like to bring I made this brand new show. I have lived experience of autism. This is a show that's semi-autobiographical, and I'd love, as part of this, to come to the venue and to talk with you at the venue about how you can better support people with lived experience of autism. And you could replace that example with a variety of different examples. But so there is that sense of like, we don't know everything, but we do want to learn. And as much as we're trying to bring an audience in, ultimately, if we want to bring an audience in that's interested in work about autism and that's likely to have a lived experience of living with, in the autistic spectrum, when you leave the venue, we need to keep doing that work going forwards. And so information and like value that you can give us about how to best do that will be invaluable for the future, and will also help us want to work with you again, because then we're seeing ourselves as a group going forwards on a pathway together. I think that's me at the end of all of my slides, and I said it would be 3:45 and it's 3:46. So I'm going to take that as a win. So we are now into the free-form part, where people are encouraged to ask any questions that they might have. Don't be afraid to be super specific or to ask general questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions about topics that we haven't covered between myself and Emma. And I know we've got some people in the room who might be producers as well, or tour bookers. So feel free to open up. And if you think that you have an answer to a question that Emma and I are dancing around trying to find an answer to, then again, don't be afraid to add those yourselves as well. So does anybody have a question that they would like to ask on camera, or should we give it a few minutes as well, just in case anyone wants to type a question into the chat? And I guess, Emma, do you have any questions? Michelle. Wonderful. Michelle, would you like to turn your camera and microphone on? I'll just see whether I can. There we are.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I'm actually Ellie. I'm the other one from Blown Fuse Theatre. I need to change my name. Sorry about that. Oh, I'm here. Hello. Yeah, I actually wrote down my question because I have a habit of rambling on these things. Sorry, my pronouns are she, her. So our work as an Essex-based, collaborative, community-focused company presents us with a few dilemmas when it comes to touring. Number one, We make work that is community focused, made with and for a local population that has ever decreasing access to arts and culture. And this means that our work is free to access for audiences. Number 2, following from that, it's important to us that our work appears in community spaces, town centres, shopping areas, etc., and not necessarily the venue's own building. How might a venue such as the Place or Cambridge Junction programme work such as ours, and how would you recommend we pitch to you, knowing the work will not make revenue for the venue?
Great question.
I hope that's all right. I'm going to mute now.
Emma, do you want to lead off, or shall I?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Thanks. Sorry, just your name's Ellie. Thanks, Ellie. Nice to meet you. So yeah, I think it's basically, for me, it's a case of having a conversation with the venue, as I was saying earlier. So just literally, if you send a bit of information about your work, but you don't have to kind of answer all of those questions up front, and be like, there's a couple of opportunities or different ways we'd like to present. So it'd be good to have a conversation with you about how you work with community programming, because at Cambridge Junction we are at the moment doing a new community programme which is being developed in conversation with communities and responding to different needs and what we're finding through our outreach. That's not necessarily on our website. So what I was saying to you earlier, in terms of not everyone has the capacity, and I'm sure you find this at the Place, to continuously update with outreach, because they're just actually doing it a lot of the time. And so I think, yeah, it's really important to be clear about what it is that is important to your company. So saying that the work is freely accessible, that's not something that at Cambridge Junction we wouldn't consider doing. We would just have to think about the right context for it, and yeah, presenting it as part of something which we felt is responding to the needs of our communities. And then I think in terms of another thing that would be good to do when approaching venues about this work is think about the spaces that you could see it being presented in. So through our community programme, we've been working in different community spaces in Cambridge, Romsey Community Centre, or Queen Edith, creative cafes and different things like that, which don't take a lot of research, but just could strengthen that initial kind of approach to a venue, saying I've seen that there's this community space, I feel like our work would be really good there, because all of those things just kind of open up the conversation. And then I would say it sounds really important for it to be the right relationship with the venue that you're working with, so someone who can fully get behind the ideas of making work that's accessible for all, and building together with you, instead of being we're programming this as a one-off, looking at kind of the wider community programming. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. That wasn't me saying yes, that was helpful. That was just me agreeing with what you were saying. I think from my side, it would be a case of establishing quite early on the timeline on how long we consider that might be. That again, we are super interested in work that happens outside of the walls of our venue, of creating increased visibility for the performing arts in our town, and that we may have a number of different partners that are working locally, which may engage with your work, and that we actually might be the broker for that relationship rather than the end recipient of it. That there may be other organizations that are crying out for your type of work that is going to embed itself and explore those kinds of themes. And we're not going to be precious about well, no, they approached us as the venue, so it should happen at the venue. Actually, we want to see it happen. We want to see our town being a creative and vibrantly cultural place, and we're as happy to facilitate that happening as we are to make it happen. So yeah, a timeline on that. In terms of not earning money for the venue, that wouldn't necessarily be a complete barrier. In a lot of places, it might be that the venue feels like through your work they might be able to unlock a piece of funding that might be from a local pot, that might be not specifically culturally or artistically focused, that might have more about, it might have its measurements might be more to do with engaging large numbers of people. And that through a piece of work like this, we can unlock a chunk of money that can help you to part finance the work you're going to do, and might provide a small amount of income towards the venue to cover the sort of conversations that we might have, and a little bit of the time that we would spend on that. It might even be, in a very specific example, that we would push you in those directions and say, we're here. If you know, we're a contacts book. Email us if you need more contacts. We're not expecting to earn anything from doing this, as long as we can pass things on and we know that you're going to do the work to make that happen. Does that answer your question, Ellie?
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, and thank you to the BSL interpreters as well.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat from Aaron. And Aaron asks, in terms of programming for a performance for children of Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, what would be the best time to approach? For example, in October 2022 half term. I guess I've got a kind of follow-up question, which is, do you mean approach a venue, or do you mean approach the school? I appreciate that they are slightly the same, but from our experience, we try to get stuff for schools out at the beginning of the term, before the term in which that work might be being presented. So for October half term, I would be wanting to try and reach out to schools at the very beginning of the summer term, so around April, May time. It might be in other locations that needs to be longer. It might need to be a year or 9 months ahead. And in some circumstances, you might find actually it's easiest to do it at the very beginning of the term in which that work is happening. But I think, and I'm not dancing around the answer of this too much, I think that the way in which venues' relationships with schools is happening now, it is quite different to how it was happening during and pre-pandemic. And certainly the thing that we've experienced as a venue has been that schools right now are contacting us more than they've ever done before to try and arrange visits. They have money, they have stuff that they want to do, but they want it yesterday or the day after, or in this term. And I've had to do a bit where I've had to say to some schools recently, like, hello, you've never contacted us before, so we haven't programmed anything for you because you never wanted it. It's great to meet you. Let's talk about how we can make this go forwards. Aaron, you've turned your camera on, which makes me think that you might have an answer to my question.
Thank you for that. It's been a brilliant session. It's a bit noisy, so that's why I'm a bit off the camera. But my question is, in May, June, I'm going to be developing a show all about the climate change with puppetry and songs, etc. And then I'm going to go into schools in September. So my ambition was to do the show as well in theatres in October half term, but I'm just worried that that's a bit too late in terms of programming.
It might be. It's, I think, the answer to that one. Yeah, because basically you're talking about reaching a school-aged audience outside of school by producing a half-term show. So your timeline on that one might be a bit tight. Emma, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would say frustratingly, the answer is like, it depends entirely on the venue, and like different venues have different programming timelines. And So it's always best to reach out as soon as you can, even if you don't have like all of the resources at that point, but just to say like, can you let me know when what your programming timeline is? Quite a lot of people with family program will reach out to me. Like I'll have such different things. It'll be like, we've got a show in 2 months, or we've got it in a year. Like that's when we're going on the road. And I'll respond with Cambridge Junction's programming. I aim to have everything locked in like around April time for the following season. So we have 2 seasons, spring season and autumn season. Around April, May, I'll have everything locked in for the autumn season, family season, because I have a print deadline. And then around September, October, November is when I'm programming for the following spring. But that is different. Like I'm a member of the Theatre for Young Audiences Network, and some of the theatres that don't have print deadlines might be looking to fill gaps. And also, as Alex was saying earlier, really usefully about funding, some venues will have programmed a show which is funding dependent, and then that show hasn't received its funding, so they will have gaps. So even when you've got to the point where you think, oh, like I'm sure all the venues will be programmed now, it's still worth just saying, look, this is ready to go. Have you got any gaps in your program? Because they might have something fallen through for whatever reason. So just, yeah, contacting and finding out like when their deadlines are, and then saying you could fill gaps. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I think I would go back and sort of reiterate that prior to the pandemic, my answer would have been very similar to Emma's. Like, we try to program and lock things in between like 6 months in advance if we can, but we might be talking about it anything up to 18 months in advance. Right now, re-establishing live activity with audiences, I've got a professional show that's on in a month that I still haven't nailed down fully. So I think now is probably a safer time to be a bit more last minute, because I think venues are still re-establishing. The answer to this question will be different in a year's time, assuming we all make it through. The other thing I'll flag, and this is a very place answer to this one, is to say it might also, we have seen that there are fewer people coming forward with work, professional work, that touring work has yet to restart at our scale as much as it was beforehand. Equally, we are wanting to invest quite heavily in our local community and make more space available than ever before for local dance groups, schools, etc. Partly from a purely financial perspective, it's good to have hiring that's going to help us stabilize a little bit, but also it's about, like, you know, coming back out of hibernation after basically 2 years, and reconnecting or connecting for the first time with people out there who are making this work, and re-stabilizing what the local cultural community might be. So then we might have more availability because there's less shows, and we might also be making decisions much later because in Bedford, community organisations and community companies are often thinking maybe 3 or 4 months ahead. So actually our thinking right now is maybe 3 or 4 months ahead. Is that good for my mental health? But it's the situation that we're in.
Can I just say on that, it was very similar at the Marley as well. It would be like, okay, what are we going to do in a month, 2 months? Whereas now I'm like looking at 2023 autumn.
No chance.
Yeah.
Annabelle and Lucy from Glorious Productions, you've written a question in the chat, which is, this is such an informative session. Thank you all so much. Do you work with NRTF? If so, how does that relationship work? Do you recommend joining? Now, NRTF is the National Rural Touring Foundation. And from my question mark at the end of that, you will probably be able to tell that no, we don't work with them, unfortunately. I don't believe that they operate in the Bedfordshire area. But I do and have worked with companies that have worked with them and had a very positive experience doing so. Did you want to follow that up, Annabelle? You look like you were about to jump on and say something. Or Lucy?
No, it's just something I've been looking into, and I haven't had any experience of them. So it would be really useful if somebody does. But if lots of theatres don't engage with them, then I'm happy to continue as I am and maybe revisit them later.
Emma, have you any experience of?
I'm afraid I haven't. Sorry, I didn't actually know what the what it stood for either. Sorry.
At risk of making up answers that then prove to not be true, I will refrain from doing that and say, unfortunately, I haven't. From experience of rural touring foundations, not just the national one, what I've seen in the past is that they tend to, or they have tended to work quite far in advance, because I think what happens, maybe wrong, is that they produce a kind of booklet or a menu of shows of different styles that they then publish to their membership, and the membership pick from that. And so obviously there is an additional longer term kind of feedback process that's required. And I've definitely worked with artists in the past where perhaps that entire 3-week period might be penciled in 9 months' time, as well. We might have touring through a touring network at that point, but we don't know. And actually, no one might pick our show, in which case we won't do it. So that week might suddenly become available, or those weeks might become available for touring to venues. Yeah, anything else I say is going to be a statement based on no facts. So I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you.
Anybody else has any questions or anything that they would like to follow up or ask about? No? Okay, wonderful. Did I have a question? I've got a question for Emma, so I'm gonna ask this question. You talked about debriefing.
Mm-hmm.
And the value of that to you and to the organisation. What do you do with that feedback?
Well, the thing is, I want people to do it more, because they don't, and I think it would be a really useful thing. So with shows that we've programmed, obviously we haven't had a massive program since the coronavirus pandemic, so any kind of changes that we're implementing are happening live. Like, we're basically trying things out for the first time. But I do say to artists that we've had in the program, would you be interested in having a debrief? And we hope that people, like, anything that they share with us, we say, do you mind if it's shared confidentially? And then we feed them back to the rest of our team, because we have a meeting every month, which is our equality, diversity, inclusion and belonging meeting. So it covers a lot of different aspects, but in as part of that, it's about experience of the venue, and that's where we discuss like any feedback that companies may have about how they experience working with us. I'm desperate for it, to be honest, because we've only had positive feedback, and that's not me thinking that the venue isn't a positive place. It just makes me think, if I haven't had any sort of thing that we can improve on, how are we going to do that? And I think that a lot of the time people might feel afraid to say, oh, like it's I can't think of an example. Oh, you never get back to my emails. It's really annoying. It'd be good for me to hear that, so I can think, okay, that's what I need to be working on. Or like, yeah, and because being a venue that doesn't know the areas that you need to improve on, it just means that it's not going to like make any difference. And I think it's also about like trying to take steps towards changing the like really unfair power dynamics between being a venue which has like all of the power and then like a company trying to come in. It's like, how do we open up opportunities for people to feed back to us about the process of working with us? So that's why, like today, I thought I would include that it's good to talk about debriefs, and as a programmer, it's something that I'm including going forward with artists that we're working with. Like, it'd be great to have a conversation, and yeah, I want to build that in.
Yeah, I can fully see that. We often have conversations within our team about how, because I like to joke with my team and with people and sort of volunteers that I live in the future, that I live exclusively in the future.
Yeah.
That I'm always thinking about what's coming up and never about what's about to happen. And that as a result of that, that's also true of our marketing department. I would say that our kind of operations team, perhaps our tech team, perhaps the front of house team, are very much like in the present, like what's happening today. And sometimes I struggle to get them to think about what might be happening over the course of the week. So they very much live in the present, whereas I exist in this kind of amorphous future that stretches next week into 2024 or 25. Taking time to stop as an organization, to turn around and to look back at what we've done is super important. And we are, as an organization, trying to work to embed moments where we do that. For exactly that reason, like understanding what you're doing well and understanding what needs to be improved can only really come from asking questions and taking time to look at it. And we're trying to find someone within the organization at the moment where I'm saying, I want you to be the person whose job it is to face backwards.
Yeah.
To stop us, because for me as a personally, the internal cogs to stop being forwards and to stop and to turn actually takes quite a lot of energy for me to not be thinking in the future. So having a process where you go, we want this, it's going to happen, we're going to feed that in. You've got your monthly meeting. Presumably that monthly meeting also informs board level decisions as well about kind of policies going forwards. That sounds really, really valuable.
Yeah. Also, sorry, my screen's gone completely black. So if there's like a question that I can't see or anything at this point, just let you know. But yeah, I completely agree, Alex, about like taking the time to stop and turn back. It's so difficult to put it in, but it's really important. And like it came, basically I had a conversation with an artist the other day who was telling me about why like venues need to take a look at like what we expect and demand from artists, and it's like marketing deadlines are really important for us, but there might be various reasons that someone needs to have like a lot of notice about like when something is going to be required of them. And it's just basically, you know, what I was saying at the start about having more of a human approach, because I think when we work in a venue and we're like very stressed and busy, it's quite easy to think quite organizationally, and like if you can build in that space to like talk about the human experience.
Yeah, I fully feel that. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, no, it's like we need it. I find I'm often pulling on we're not a corporate organization. Those of you in the chat and in the event might have noticed I'm not particularly corporate in the way that I represent myself, and so, but I'm quite happy to sometimes like to pull on the mantle of, well, no, organizational setup. Oh, we can't possibly. Nah, we can possibly. We definitely can. Any final questions, or anyone had any thoughts, cogitations, ruminations, whatever you want? Feel free to throw that in right now. No worries. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here, and thanks for everybody who's put stuff in the chat to say how useful this has been and how clear and in depth we've been about that. That's really appreciate that, because it's I guess for us it sort of feels like it's quite often it's our day-to-day bread and butter, and that we don't get to. I sometimes just assume that people aren't interested. Like, why would they care about my worries and anxieties? But of course, it's a useful insight into, I guess, what's going on in the background. So thank you all very much for joining us today and for your questions. And I really hope it has been useful and valuable, and will inform the work that you do going forwards. Just to let you all know that this is the first in a series of 3 of these online discussions that the Place are hosting over the next 3 weeks. So the next one is next Wednesday, which I believe is the 9th, and the final one is on the 16th. This particular one, we have looked exclusively at live touring, but next week we're convening more of an open table, less of a presentation, and more of an open table discussion, which is looking at these ideas around audiences of geography versus audiences of interest, which has impacts on both live work, but also on digital work. So in particular, we thought that might be of use to sit within the Living Record Festival, with it being a digital festival, but knowing that there might be people out there who are also interested in the live performance element as well. So that one is more of an open table discussion where we're going to explore these ideas and come and talk about strategies, do a bit of sharing of personal experience, and hopefully talk with a few artists who have experience of delivering work both digitally and in person, and talk about like how they've approached finding audiences, what they do as artists. And then the final one on the 16th is a discussion that I'm going to be chairing with artists that make work that is either digital or online or both, that looks at and talks about the idea of liveness, or eventiness, as someone I was in a discussion with recently called it. So that's almost exclusively looking at sort of digital culture and online performance, and we will be exploring these sort of ideas about like what separates a piece of live digital art from a film or a recorded show, and looking in more depth around those things. And we're hoping to be joined by people from Upstart Theatre, who run Dare Festival in London, which looks at a lot of contemporary performance art making, who are going to be sharing their experiences of working in the digital arena as well. So if you're free, same times, 2:30 to 4:30 next Wednesday for our audiences discussion, and the Wednesday after that on the 16th for our discussion around liveness. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time, and you are free to go off and enjoy what's left of this afternoon's light. Thank you for being here.